So the dog and I are down here in Recherche Bay doing some research, some reconnaissance. About this time of year, about 200 years ago, out on the water, there was a ship called the Cyprus, and the Cyprus suffered a mutiny.
An 1825 panorama of Hobart Town by Augustus Earle depicts the Cyprus brig, anchored. On the 14th of August 1829, the Cyprus was travelling from Hobart Town to the Macquarie Harbour Penal Station. Carrying around 30 iron convicts, the vessel took shelter in Recherche Bay, storms lashing the coast. Bound in the natural harbour for a week, the chained plotted action. While the lieutenant was off on a fishing party, convicts allowed up on the deck managed to force control of the ship. Among them, a leader emerged, William Swallow. Swallow was his alias name. He had already escaped from Van Diemen's Land once before, going back to England, only to be recaptured and sentenced again to convict life in the deep south. His original crime was theft of a quilt. Swallow was the only one among them who had proper sailing experience, having fought in the Napoleonic Wars. They unlocked their fellow transports and then sent ashore any who did not wish to join them, along with the soldiers, the sailors, and civilian passengers. It seems that an Aboriginal woman who had been abducted into custody by the ship's guards was also then taken away with the convict crew. The 18 convicts still aboard the Cyprus set out for America. Provisions were not enough though, so they first went to New Zealand and then to Tahiti. Now pirates they plundered. As they went they stole and raided other ships, attacking other people.
At this point in the trip, the guys on the Cyprus, very badly behaved, were very much pirates in every international sense of the expression. But they were working as a team, and they did something that no ship coming from Australia had done to that point, or would do for a long time afterwards, and that is they got to the shores of Japan. Getting to Japan at the time was a very remarkable thing because the country was locked off from the rest of the world. They were very cautious and protective and concerned about international influence on the place. So to go anywhere near it was incredibly dangerous because you'd be met with violent resistance. But these guys on the Cyprus, they had no idea about any of that, or at least not a real idea. And even if they did, they didn't really care because look at who was in charge of the ship. They were just out there going crazy.
In January 1830, the Cyprus appeared near Mugi on the island of Shikoku. Japan at the time was closed to foreign shipping and the local authorities were anxious to know what had just arrived. Japanese spies were sent to investigate. A samurai, disguised himself as a fisherman, got aboard. He was able later to paint several depictions of what he saw. The foreigners, with gaudy clothing, a strange mix of styles. A depiction believed to be William Swallow. He also had a pet dog. One of the other convicts displayed a memorial portrait tattoo of a woman on his chest. She had the unique Tasmanian Aboriginal hairstyle. Her passing seemed to have been recent, and the crew were in bereavement. What became of her is unknown. When the Cyprus didn't leave, the Japanese began to fire upon her, striking with cannon and musketoon balls. The Cyprus then did try to leave, but the wind would not let her. Having lifted the anchor, the Japanese offered weather advice. The Cyprus was then allowed to slowly sail away. As night fell, strange singing was heard from the ship. The crew reached China, losing only one more man aboard. 3 more departed the crew, and in February 1830, the remaining mutineers scuttled the Cyprus and took the ship's boat ashore. Pretending now that they were shipwrecked sailors, the authorities in Canton believed their story.
The Cyprus got to China, and when they got there, the crew did some very smart things. but they also made some unwise decisions. It was their point of victory. That's how they felt inside. But it was also when things began to mutate and unravel. They'd been on a winning streak, and now that trajectory was about to change. And from here, everything would slowly and then very quickly go very wrong.
The convicts scattered. Some headed for America, never to be heard from again. But Swallow and 3 others sailed for England, hitching a ride on another ship. Swallow had a wife and 3 children back home. When they were in transit, news of the mutiny on the Cyprus reached Canton, and one of the convicts who had remained there confessed to the crime. A fast ship carried the news to England, beating Swallow and his accomplices, and when they arrived, the authorities were waiting for them.
Swallow managed to make it back to England only for everything to completely collapse around him and end ultimately back where he tried to escape from, here in Van Diemen's Land. He almost made it.
The full details of what happened on the Cyprus and what became of each person on her remain a mystery, immune now from proper investigation. 2 of Swallow's accomplices would become the final 2 people to be hanged for piracy in England, as well as the last 2 people to meet the rope at execution dock. Swallow himself convinced the court that he had acted under intimidation and navigated the ship only to save himself. He was instead sent back to Van Diemen's Land, where he would serve out the remainder of his earlier sentence. For a 3rd time, he sailed south, arriving at the original destination, Macquarie Harbour, 2 years after the mutiny had taken place. He died in short years after, in 1834, at the Port Arthur prison. He was 42. William Swallow was buried in an unmarked grave on the Isle of the Dead.